All right. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we are continuing to explore the landscape of learning technology. We're cutting through the fluff and getting the questions answered you need answered. While we're getting started here, go ahead and like the post, share it, tag in somebody who'd benefit from the conversation. And for those of you who are watching, for whatever reason, YouTube geeked out. So if you're on YouTube, you can't see this, but it doesn't matter because you'll find it on LinkedIn or one of the many other places that we're streaming. So it's fine. I will put the video there afterwards. You just can't participate live. But this is called flexing in the flow. So, all right, here we go. Today I am joined by John Pebbles. He is the founder and CEO of Administrate. And we're going to be talking about, well, training operations and administration, and we've got a whole bunch of fun things planned. We've had a very fun get to know you before we get started. So I have no doubt that this is going to be a fun conversation. But before we get into all the tech stuff and all that, we'll do our usual get to know you stuff because I know you, John, but other people don't. Maybe some do, but many others may not. So first off, okay, where are you in the world today? And we answer that question first.
Sure. Well, I am broadcasting today from the beautiful city of Edinburgh in Scotland. And it is about 4 o'clock, which means it is almost pitch dark now. We are that far north. People tend to forget how far north the UK is, but we're on the same parallel as basically southern Alaska. Okay. So it gets pretty dark in the winter here, but it's also super nice and light in the summer.
Well, and it's good that it's dark because we talked about this. You had to sneak through the shadows of darkness to get into the office to be able to broadcast. So
That's
actually
right.
Worked out.
We've got a very narrow window of presentable that is right behind me, and that's about it.
So and this is completely unrelated, and this wasn't one of the prefab questions, but I'll ask because you have guitars behind. Are you a guitar person?
Yeah, I'm a very bad guitar player, but that was okay when I was in my teens and in college, or as they would say in Scotland, in university, because I just played hard rock, which is, you tune down to drop D and it makes the fretting a lot easier, and you just bash the guitar a bunch, and it usually works out okay. So I haven't played these things really regularly in a few years, but they're my decor, so they remind me of maybe my past faded
cool
glory.
Decoration. I got to give it that. I got to give it that. Okay. Well, I'm in Waukesha, where I always am. Right, literally, am always here. So that hasn't changed. But now, before we get into it again, the question that has nothing to do with learning technology is, and you had a lot, so I'm very interested to hear where you landed on this. Everybody else can play along too, but what is the worst travel experience you've ever had?
So I would say I've had many, many miserable travel experiences. And, so we won't go into stories of being arrested or near arrested or, crazy countries all over the world or anything like that, because those were actually just fairly okay. I think for me, and the one I always joke about with my family is I grew up in the People's Republic of China. And so I lived there until I went to college, and my folks still live there about at least 10, 15 years after I was graduated from high school. And so every year they would buy a plane ticket for me to come home at Christmas. And, we would buy from this super cut rate travel agent that no longer exists. And with all the surprises that would, I would always be in like a back middle seat right by the bathroom, whatever. But one year we got a screaming deal, and it was like $200 or $300 cheaper than ever before. And it just meant that I was going to school in Indiana. And so I flew from Indianapolis, and normally you'd do, Indianapolis, Detroit, Beijing, and you're home. But this time it was Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and then Cincinnati to LA. And then in LA, they announced just before we were taking off that they had overloaded the plane. And so we were going to be making an unscheduled refueling stop in Anchorage, Alaska. And so we stopped at Anchorage, and they opened the doors because that was regulation. We couldn't get out. We're all just standing there, and there's the doors, and they're refueling us. And then we flew from Anchorage to Shanghai. and then from Shanghai to Beijing. And so it was something like, 35 hours on the clock after I had, actually gotten to the airport in Indianapolis that I made it back home to my family in Beijing. And I just teased them about that. It was the worst travel experience of all time. And actually that's, when you think about it, it was okay. I was 19.
So it was okay. You got your segments, right? You got your status segments. That's for sure.
No, but that's the thing is you didn't get any frequent flyer miles with these cut rate tickets because
that's true.
That's one of the things.
Okay, so 35 hours and 37 segments and nothing to show for it. And you finally made it home.
But we were home, so
All right. Well, it was funny. I had to reflect on this quite a bit because I don't really travel anymore, very rarely. I used to all the time. I used to travel all the time. Now I don't. And so I'm like, man, just thinking back, digging into the archives, I'm sure I had a number of flight ones. I used to be a real jet setter and but mine were always really small. Like I never had some dramatic, even yours was like, wow, you went all over, you flew all over. Mine was like, the person next to me, I had earplugs in, I put them in front of them and I put headphones on and I'm singing and they're still trying to talk to me. And I'm like, what part of this are you not understanding that I'm trying to focus here? But then I was like, well, I guess there was one. I had to go out to our corporate headquarters. And so I was there and we got hit by a snowstorm. I'd gone out there. A friend of mine worked with me at the time and we'd gone together. And then we got there and we got hit in Connecticut with just the world's worst snowstorm. And we knew it was coming. And so we're like, our flight's going to get canceled and we're going to get stuck out here. And so we had this random idea, like, I know, let's rent a car and drive home. Took us
I think there's a movie about that,
It was terrible because we drove through a blizzard, not just like in one city, but we decided to drive through the path of the blizzard in the opposite direction. And we started driving right as the blizzard hit. So we're like, hey, great, let's go across the country and go through the entire blizzard the whole way. But, to your point, it was kind of fun. It was an adventure. We only went off the road once. It really wasn't that bad, but it did take a long time.
Yeah, more and more, it's just when I'm traveling and things go haywire, it's like, I just keep reminding myself, this is just going to be a great story one day.
One day,
Maybe
I'm
not this day.
I'm going to be on a live stream with Christopher Lynn.
Exactly.
And I'm going to be able to tell this story for everyone and they will enjoy it. All right. Well, so let's end with the travel stories. Those of you watching, also be sure to comment in. I will bring the comments in if you have questions along the way as we get going. But let's transition into Administrate and this whole learning operations. So, as the founder of this thing, I've got to know the story, and I think everybody else would benefit from this to just hear where did this come from? Were you just sitting in an airport in Anchorage and you said, I know, I'm going to create a training administration platform?
No, not at all. It's an interesting story actually. And basically, so I graduated from college, university, and ended up working at a startup in South Florida. And, it was a great experience. I was the CTO and COO of that company, and we grew really, really quickly. And we were growing within a very niche segment of healthcare, which was pharmacy technology. And specifically within that, pharmacy transaction processing for these very special programs that had complex regulatory and pricing and all this type of stuff, right? And all of this was just super niche. And even if you're a pharmacist, you had to come on board and learn a ton. And as we started to grow very quickly to about 120 people in just a few years and had a couple hundred hospitals, and we started to bring on partners and we had customers, all of these different segments needed training. And we really just struggled with it. And I remember it was an acute problem because you had to come on board and we had to get you up to speed and hopefully within weeks or months. And we didn't have any software to track it. We tinkered around with building some stuff. There was a lot of LMSs out there, but for us, as a combination of intensive classroom plus recertification, all the types of things that you would see in a complex training environment. And after I left that company, I had the opportunity to exit. It was one of those things that just stuck in my mind. That was this unsolved problem that really bothered me because, it's like there has to be a better way to solve this. And at the time, we were in South Florida. We were desperate for engineers. South Florida is not where I would recommend starting a tech company per se.
Really?
Yeah, it's a major metro area that at the time was graduating about 55 computer science graduates per year. And anyway, we looked to Scotland to potentially open up an engineering hub in Edinburgh, and it never worked out for some silly unrelated reasons. But as I kind of looked back, I grew up overseas, wanted to continue to live overseas. There was this company in Scotland that was called Administrate, and they were looking for somebody to come on board. And what it was software that had been an internal tool built by a training company up in the Highlands, a little town named Fort William, which is the gateway to the Highlands. Incredibly beautiful surroundings. But this training company had started cobbling together some software that they thought could help run their operation. Okay. And as they did this, some other partners and so on got interested and, asked, can we buy this? And so it started life as a spin out. But that idea of there's this software that can basically be infrastructure for that training operation resonated with me. And I felt like there wasn't much else out there on the market that was really focused on that problem. And that was about 9 years ago when I moved over here and came on board.
Okay. Got it. Well, and so what's interesting about that is when you think about the inner workings or the operations of this stuff, that's not necessarily something you watch. You look on YouTube, you go to conferences. That's usually not the headliner.
Yeah.
It's usually not the headliner. You're like, I am so excited to talk about the inner workings and the ops of learning and development. So I am just curious, and this is kind of more of a random get to know. Are you more of a process? Is that kind of just the way is that what drew you to it? Where you're like, I kind of like this space, even though it's not as flashy as maybe the LXP or something like that?
Yeah. So, I think for me, being the chief operating officer of this startup previously, the idea of having platforms that we could run portions of our business on was something that we thought a lot about, and this is back in 2006 when we started this company. And there just wasn't the huge range of software solutions out there. Even stuff like bug trackers for engineering just wasn't nearly as mature as it is today. And so, I've always been very interested in platforms that can help a business operate and be more efficient and so on. And, one of the things when I was growing up, my father was running a training company in China, and my mother was a teacher, unfortunately for me at times, although it was good overall. She was a teacher in my high school, taught me. And, my sister.
You want to look at it.
Yeah, she might watch this too. So, so my sister was a special education teacher, and I taught English in Asia to make money. And so there's just this idea that there's this whole portion of education behind the scenes that most of us have never thought about as students. No. that I really knew existed and had felt in a variety of different roles, kind of that let's get people trained because our business requires it, or I've got to do all this admin work because I'm a teacher walking into this training center. All that stuff I'd kind of experienced at different times, and it resonated a lot with me.
Okay. So we'll get into that because I do want to talk about that. But before we do, I am really curious because this can sometimes, especially when you think about this, if you've been an educator, if you've run the operations of a learning organization, if you've been an operator, even in business, you understand sometimes a little more keenly that, and we use the analogy of the iceberg, but backstage was you see this. What you don't see is the other 90% behind that. But that can sometimes be hard to explain. So I am curious when you tell people what you do, or hey, we created a software called Administrate. How do you describe it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what we tend to talk about these days, and this is, after a number of years kind of testing this idea or this thesis, today we talk about the fact that we are ed tech infrastructure, right? Okay. We really want to be infrastructure that all the other tools and things within the ed tech industry can plug into, and probably the rest of your tech stack that's within the main business that you're running. And so that's what we describe ourselves. If you are not in the industry, you're kind of like, isn't there already stuff to do that? That's weird. Oh, I had an LMS once, and so on.
And you just say thanks. Okay, you know what?
We're like,
I gotta go get a coffee.
Exactly. And if you're in the industry, you might even, depending on how large your organization, where you sit within the training organization or L&D, you might think, we've got all that figured out. Normally executives, we got all that figured out. But if you're on the team that's normally responsible for things like reporting or analytics or classroom instruction delivery, resource management, usually it really quickly resonates because that predominantly is managed with spreadsheets today.
Okay, and I would completely agree with that sentiment that a lot of times, because things are happening, people just assume, we got that covered. Yeah. We got that covered. It's all good. As far as I know, everything's great. But you start digging in, and I think this is one of the most important reasons why, as leaders, it is really important to, not that you got to be in the weeds, but you got to know what's happening in the trenches and understand what's going on. Because to your point, I would say most organizations, if you actually peel back the onion and saw what was going in to make it work, you would go, we can do better than this. Like we can improve this, and not just you're doing something wrong. No, there's got to be a better way. We're using way too many resources, spending way too much time. There's way too much efficiency into the system.
Absolutely. And I think the way that we tend to think about it is, this might be the third or fourth wave potentially of a transition that we've already witnessed. And, it started kind of with CRM, right? Okay. And it was first the sales team was like, we need a system to help run our whole operation, whatever. And prior to that, maybe in the 80s, 90s, but, it wasn't super well. And okay, fine, we'll get a CRM. And then the second wave, if you will, was kind of marketing teams, right? Because if you rewind 10, 15 years, marketing didn't have any tools or platforms or anything. No. And they would just spend money, and it'd be maybe Mad Men in color, right? And so then then all of a sudden now it's like, marketing has got to be one of the most instrumented and tool heavy operations now. And now our hope is that wave continues into learning and development and so on, because the transformation that happens is dramatic. You have folks, 15 years ago, the idea of having a full-time CRM administrator or some sort of full-time data scientist or analytics person on a marketing team, that would just be really strange. And I think we're kind of at the cusp of that in L&D right now today. And hopefully that just continues. But I don't think it's a new thing. And I don't think it's a thing that we're unfamiliar with. It just hasn't yet hit L&D in force.
I'm really glad you brought that point up. I actually hadn't made the connection. I had with marketing, but I didn't really think about it from a sales CRM standpoint. And it is a very relatable analogy where you can think about before CRMs, there was just this, sales, they keep track of their customers and they know where deals are and deals are happening. So we're good. Versus all of a sudden it was, when you really started looking at the need, you started realizing there is a lot of inefficiency and there's a lot of lost revenue and a lot of lost, resources and wasted resources that we just didn't know were happening because it was all behind the curtain. And we just kind of figured, hey, I don't care how the sausage is made as long as it comes out the other end. And I think that's a similar journey that we're on right now as an organization. And to me, where I see, to your point of, do we think this trend should move forward? I think the answer is an obvious yes, or that would be to me, yes, it should. I think what's going to keep it moving in that direction, if it wasn't already, is one, right? This stuff is becoming mainstream and it's going to just naturally tread into our territory. But I feel like 2020 especially, and again, to your point, all this stuff was coming before. this stuff was coming for us one way or the other. But I think one of the things that 2020 did is it really turned up the heat on accountability in two ways for our field. One was our businesses were struggling, so they had to ask more questions. They couldn't just go, well, learning happens and they have this budget. And I know they may not really be able to answer how they come to that, but it's fine. So there was that pressure, which I think we felt varying degrees of that for a long time. But I think now the other thing that really tuned it up was, in 2020, our businesses really needed us, and realized they needed us. It was like this eye-opening moment of, holy smokes, we need this function to help us get through this, to develop our employees. We're transitioning. We're in territory we've never been in before, and we know it. And as a result, that accountability got tuned up, and there were questions being answered that we've kind of been able to get away with not answering for a very long time. So I think that's where I don't think it's going to go back. So I think that should move us in the right direction.
There's so many thoughts, actually, because I agree with everything you said. And I mean, it's almost, I could say about 5 or 6 things in response to that. But, it's one of the things that we have as a hope for our customers and learning professionals everywhere, and I'm a huge fan of the West Wing, right? So I'm always like bringing in bits of that show. You've had a lot of
show movie references already, and we're only 20 minutes in.
Yeah. So in the West Wing, somebody basically does something dumb and thinks that they might be in trouble. And then this whole thing, comes out of it. But there's this key moment where the press secretary goes in and just says, you need to remember that I'm your first phone call, right? If you think you're getting into trouble. And it's that idea that we really want L&D to be effectively the CEO or the management team's first phone call when there's going to be a big change, if there's going to be a new revenue opportunity, if there's going to be cost cutting, if there's going to be a change in market dynamic. We want the L&D team to be literally the first phone call, because that's the way we think it should be. The larger you get in organizations, the more complex you get. Yep. You think back to my silly example, the tech startup in South Florida. We only had 120 people, and it was most of them were on Eastern time zone, right? You think about complex, multinational, multi-regional operations, and it just explodes in complexity. And so how do you get to the point where you are that first phone call like you should be, and being able to feed in the data and so on that you need? That's what we think a lot about, and that's kind of our vision, or one of the pieces of our vision of this ed tech infrastructure, facilitating that.
Well, it gets to the point of, and I've almost gotten tired of hearing this, because it's been said so long, and then so often there's no action taken to get to this. But there's always this talk of, we want to move from order takers to strategic business partners. And you're like, that's fine. You can keep saying that till you're blue in the face. But if you don't start acting like a strategic partner, where you have your operations in order and the CEO can trust, hey, we have a big business market shift. We're going to need to develop the organization, or we need to make sure that people, are ready for this from a change management or development standpoint. They need to know that when you pick up the phone and they say this, you don't go, yeah, let's see if we can figure something out. I'm not really sure how we're going to pull this off. That you can just say, hang on, we're going to prioritize this. We're going to come back and we're going to be able to execute. And here's what we think we're going to be able to do with that.
Yeah, it's a journey that we talk a lot about, that we want to help. We want to partner with organizations and go on with them. And it's kind of this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where with
we're dropping academic terms here.
Remember back,
a whole new direction.
Remember back to maybe we took a course on this or whatever. And I was talking about this one time, and somebody came up afterwards and they're like, I've done significant research on this, and is a largely discredited theory. And I said, oh, okay. But we'll lurch in anyway. So bottom level is like air and water and whatever, and you go up. And
Wi-Fi. I thought Wi-Fi was the new bottom.
Well, now you've just stolen my joke, because at the top of the pyramid, right? It's like, where is my free Wi-Fi, right? And those are your first world problems, right? My coffee was too hot or too cold or whatever. But that's what we talk about with our customers and learning organizations is like the bottom levels are just getting organized, right? And then because that takes a lot, and that could take a year, that could take 2 years. You have companies, they'll have different regimes, acquisitions, all this different tech that needs to be dealt with and so on. Just getting organized is a big job. And then moving up, it's like, how can we automate? Then once we're automated, we've got the space to be much more analytical. And then you've got that space to react to a business priority or a situation. We saw a lot of customers, they were pivoting business models in some cases and trying to react and support initiatives that might have been COVID-19 related and so on. Having that flex and that organization and so on to be able to move on a dime was really transformative for a few of them. And it was pretty cool to see.
Cool. So on this operate, because I think one of the things I do want to actually decrypt this a little bit, and then I want to talk about what actually goes into it, because you hit on a couple of things that I think are really important. That I think there's sometimes the reason we've gone, yeah, we really should clean this up, but so we'll get to that. But when you say kind of cleaning up your operations, there are tools out there that have specific focuses, whether it's specifically around content things. So when you say the ops, what components of the ops really is within the umbrella of Administrate?
Yeah, it's a great question, and maybe we'll just say what it's not to get started.
Not. Right? So what is it with what is it not?
Yeah. So what it's not is a direct replacement for whatever learning management system that you have, and that's even optimistic, saying that you only have one, probably, right? So most of our customers will have multiple.
That is a very generous assumption.
Yeah, and they're they all do things well, and they all do things. Most of them do things that Administrate doesn't. And we have an e-learning function and so on, but it's much more of the LXP. Our goal is to front these various systems and basically give a unified view to students, and then they hop out of Administrate and go off into whatever learning product it is, and they do their learning there. And the idea is to get the information from those other LMSs and so on back into Administrate, right? Okay. Because what we are is really focused on things like resource management, classroom management. Most organizations don't run their classroom management within any learning product today. It's usually within a spreadsheet or amalgamation of calendars. Yeah. And even
people
more,
MacGyver it big time.
And even more difficult is if you're an internal training team, you are probably sharing resources that are meeting rooms and so on that are managed, outside of your domain, some calendar somewhere.
An exchange, it's something you're working through some sort of admin or somebody who holds the keys to the actual room itself.
Yeah. And then it's okay. There are lots of activities and learning activities and things that need to be done that are around potentially those e-learning activities. So Learning Pass is a big one. And those could be just things like, achieving this certificate or going to this workshop or doing this thing or submitting this book or whatever it is, right? All that stuff. And then, all of the mechanisms around requesting learning, tracking the learning, scheduling instructors, dealing with vendors, dealing with resources. Many customers will have complex simulators or equipment that they need to be trained hands-on. All of that resource management is kind of our bread and butter and what we help customers with. And then, once that is done and you can start to be analytical about it. So we've invested a lot in reporting and so on. We then want to plug into the mainline business systems. Okay. And so if you're a manufacturer, that could be whatever is running your assembly line on the floor. That could be your mainline CRM. If you're, a software company or something. And the reason we want to do that is because then you can actually start making business decisions or at least illustrating how your training and your operational excellence is supporting those business objectives. Okay. So probably this is, again, a bit abstract, and that chafes me when I'm listening to people being very abstract. But like a great example of this is if you're a manufacturer, and we did this with a customer of ours, Brunswick, who makes a lot of boat. They have a lot of boat brands in addition to bowling balls.
I was just going to say the bowling company.
Yes. So that I would say I don't remember, but I think, how many bowling balls you have to sell to make one boat, and they've got like 15 different boat brands.
Wow.
So, we go in with Boston Whaler, who is inexplicably located in North Florida, and they integrated us with their assembly line manufacturing resource planning software. And so it was simple stuff, but all things being equal, if Chris, you're being scheduled for a shift and I'm being scheduled for the same shift, they'll go with you because you've progressed farther or longer or done what better in your training or had the training, and I haven't. And so that's just a very simple thing. And then once you show up on the assembly line, it was, okay, install this propeller. Let's just say you could only accept that job if you'd been trained because the system was querying Administrate. And then once you're actually sitting there installing the propeller, you could pull up the training materials and the documentation reference stuff, again, served out of Administrate into the software so you can remember which way the propeller turned. And it's things like that when we went in and visited and said, how's it going? This is a number of years ago. They were all feeding back to us stuff like, we love Administrate because it reduces our manufacturing errors. And we were like, what? And I was like, oh yeah, that's actually really what we're all about here in L&D, right? Right. So that was very satisfying. And that's what we're really, really going for, if that makes sense. No,
it does. And I think, one of the things that sometimes where I would see some of this operational stuff be overlooked, especially on some of the use cases you just described, right? Especially manufacturing, any of these big types of operations is, if you're operating out of the Crystal Palace, right, corporate, sometimes you have a little bit of a disconnect for what type of operational learning is actually happening on the floors in the day-to-day. You may have a little bit over-indexed on your knowledge workers.
Yes.
Where you're not necessarily as concerned about the operations because it's like, well, there's not as dramatic of an impact. It's more around, the softer side. And again, I don't say softer like it's lesser. It's just a different side. And you may not realize there are parts of your organization that fundamentally this can, to your point, reduce manufacturing errors.
Yes.
This can reduce, customer complaints. This can reduce, increase customer sat. Some of these things that they may be metrics that aren't specifically within your wheelhouse. And it may be easy to say, well, that's not necessarily a problem I'm dealing with right now. But my answer to that would be, well, it's happening in your organization somewhere. You just may not have visibility into it. And that doesn't mean there's also not opportunity in your org itself.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's even this thing where it's like, because a lot of us are knowledge workers, and probably many of us that are watching or listening are knowledge workers, but we do forget, you can take a software engineer and more or less transplant them into any software discipline or operation pretty much anywhere. It's more or less the same. But when Brunswick was trying to hire in folks to work on their assembly line, it didn't matter if you've been an assembly line worker your entire life. You still had to go and learn. I mean, you could move from a BMW plant to a Mercedes plant. You still have to go through this whole regimen of training. Yeah, and it's non-negotiable, and it is super, super important. And the other thing that we think about a lot is, how do you turn training and the L&D function, the metrics and the data that we have, into leading or lagging indicators that are important to the business, right? So the example that I like to use is software company as a customer of ours, ForgeRock, and they're a very fast growing startup in the identity management space. But they just simply exposed training uptake records for each customer, because they train both the internal employees, but they also train customers on how to use their products. And they just expose those records to the renewals team, and they're subscription-based business, right? So renewals are the lifeblood. You have to renew. And just by seeing which customers were no longer taking any training was a massive leading indicator that customer may not renew. And the renewals team could be like, uh-oh, we've got a problem here. Nobody's been training in the last 3 or 4 months. They got a renewal date in 3 or 4 months. We need to hop on this and figure out what's going on. Yeah. So it's super powerful stuff like that we have in the L&D and the training space that the rest of the business really needs in order to achieve that excellence.
And I think it's such an important point in terms of thinking about this, because I think for a long time, we haven't realized the gold mine of business value we've been sitting on, or we really haven't been shepherding it very well, because it's just we've kind of been leaving it to do its thing, and we're like, well, we don't really know, it's on a tape drive somewhere, I'm sure, or a spreadsheet that it's all in John's head, I'm sure we're fine, and not realizing, hey, if we can actually extract that, if we can pull this out, if we can manage this really well, we now have business data, not learning data, not, hey, so many people completed e-learnings. No, we have actual business data that can show us. And if we learn how to read that, to your point of, hey, we've got leading indicators here. Customer education is another prime example I think of. I remember leading customer education for a firm, and it was a similar type thing where you could start to see, hey, we know how to predict, and we can reduce customer complaints and customer service inquiries, because we know, we've got a learning problem over here. And if we can reduce volume of that, we can dramatically reduce workforce planning for customer education. I mean, it was crazy when you actually start playing with this stuff to realize how much power you wield that we don't realize we have it.
Yeah, and it's super difficult, right? That simple act of contrasting potentially your Zendesk queries by area of the product from customers over the last 12 months with, your training uptake. That right there is a huge project that melts everyone's brains and often won't even get off the ground. That's probably the most basic level too. And so it's that type of thing. And it's nobody's fault, right? Because learning products just haven't really thought deeply about this. But that's the thing that we're hoping will be a real sea change over the next, decade, let's just say.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm now having like a cold sweat starting to run over me, as I remember times where, you didn't have tools like this to help. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, right, you're in the healthcare industry. There's an audit and you need to pull all of this stuff. Yeah, maybe you can go to your LMS and say, hey, what do we need to do? But what happens when they're like, that's not enough?
Yeah.
We need to see who's actually, and you're going, we gotta start scrubbing and looking for this stuff. And you spend the next, like I said, it's making me not feel so well right now. Just reflecting back on times when that's happened. But you almost have this amnesia where you do it and then it's over. And then you're like, well, we'll get back to it. We don't ever want to go through that again. And then life gets in front of us. We keep moving forward. And then it happens again and it happens again. And I think what we're talking about is, rather than waiting for it to happen and reacting, solve the problem so that you don't have to fix it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think compliance is such a minefield, right? Because, we've even been approached by companies, and they need to be able to tie training. A certain person got a certain training at a certain date and time on a certain document, right? That is versioned. And that is super difficult for most learning products to basically manage and handle. But that could be the difference between, winning or losing a lawsuit, frankly. Yep. So it's stuff like that. And I think, our thesis, back to this lack of infrastructure within ed tech, is, and I don't want to sound pejorative or arrogant, although I'm very arrogant, just so leave no doubt about that. But there's this, it's kind of this sneaking suspicion as the lack of infrastructure is one of the reasons why I feel like the L&D industry is so faddish at times. We just get infatuated with augmented reality, and then gamification and whatever it is. And if you notice, it's always student focused. Yeah. It's never ever focused on administrative outcomes. It's never really focused on that. And it's because there's just nothing to focus on, and so that's another thing.
Well, and it's not the fun. Again, we talked about it's funny, by the way. Sam Rogers mentioned that it's a cold sweat he gets, right? That like, oh my word, this is coming my way. I've got to figure this out. So literally there's like a pit in my stomach thinking about it. But I think this is, to your point, one of these things, and let's talk about this a little bit. because this is something that I would say many learning leaders, even, at all levels, are like, we know we probably should, if you really asked me, I would say I'm not really proud of how we manage it, or we know we could do better, but I haven't made it a priority because either one, I don't realize the risk or the benefit coming out of it. It might be that. Some of it may just be, it's not exciting. Immersive tech and a really cool LXP, that's fancy, right? It looks good on a PowerPoint, and this may not feel like it does as much, but that doesn't mean it's any less important. So what are some of the things, right, when you engage with a customer who's kind of reached that point where they've gone, you know what, time to actually tackle this thing? What are some of the things that have either prevented them from getting there or that they struggle with in those early stages?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely not a one size fits all answer here, but I would say that, it is intimidating to walk in and say, you know what, we need a 6-figure budget for a tool that, nobody's ever heard of. And we've been getting by with just fine for the last 10 or 15 years.
True.
I think that one of the things that prevents folks is you get trapped very quickly into this bad cycle. And that is, and ForgeRock's probably an interesting counterexample to this of how they avoided this. But basically what happens is maybe the company is new, and you start off and you are a small training team, or the company is of existing size and so on. And as you start to grow, what happens is you need more training, right? And so you make more sales and you launch new products and you need more training. And as you do that, you hire more people, right? In order to create the content, deliver the training and so on. And what happens is you get trapped on this treadmill where you cannot, in order to deliver more training, you have to have more people and more stuff. And then you get to a certain size, which a lot of organizations are, and it's all of a sudden the training team is 50 individuals. They're all great people. They're all working hard. They're all doing the right things as far as the situation in front of them. But you can't actually break out of that and cap effectively your coefficient of scale, right? And so where ForgeRock and other customers of ours have done a good job in this is by getting in that infrastructure early, or just saying that's it, we're going to do this. They can cap their coefficient of scale. And so additional growth, training, whatever needs can be done without adding additional people. And in fact, you could free up the people that you already have. Those 50 people could now, 20 of them might now be able to focus on content or, looking at the data and make transformative change. And so I think it's just an easy trap to fall into.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that we talk about a lot is, and this is not a very good, compelling argument necessarily, but it's this thing. It's like, well, every other department gets their system, right? And sales gets their system, marketing gets their system.
I love that. Make that a slide. Sales and marketing get theirs.
It's just simply not fair, right? And the problem is that we've done it to ourselves in L&D, which is we have said that the learning management system is our system, and it's our system of record, and it's just not. And that's not a knock on any. There's some brilliant LMSs out there, but it's just so kind of reframing that is probably something that needs to happen when you're thinking about this.
And as I've done this and as I've worked with other people on it, I think it's why I think it's why I started this show. It's why I do a lot of the things I do. We need to up our digital acumen to be able to tell those stories, to be able to explain, no, the LMS isn't everything. We've been trying to make the LMS everything for way too long. We've been trying to say, well, the LMS, we just need the LMS to do this and this and this. And it's like, no, we didn't. Actually, we needed other tools to support what we were doing and stop putting all our chips in that one basket. And I think that's where there's opportunity to say, hey, how are we thinking about the ecosystem and our operations and being able to tell that compelling story. What's interesting though about these, from a budget standpoint, at least in my experience, sometimes these are the easier stories to tell on this, because sometimes these resonate really well with your operators and your finance people. If you're able to actually articulate, look, here's the inefficiency, or here's some of the operational breakdowns that we can clean out of this. This is how we can actually justify the return on this investment. A lot of times this is a business conversation that very much you get the head nods. You're trying to explain to them about a culture, creating a culture of development, and that can sometimes be a little bit more of a stretch to help them see that connection. I think it's much easier now, but I think sometimes these can be an easier one. And I guess the other thing that I was going to add to this is, to me, one of the beauties in this, I've actually had systems help save this, is when you look at 2020. There's nothing worse than that conversation where the business isn't doing so hot and you're sitting on a massive team of learning professionals, all of which you love, they're doing great work, and the business says we gotta cut back, and you can't even make a strong, compelling business case as to why let's look somewhere else, because you can't articulate what is happening and what everybody is doing, and not from a micromanagement standpoint, but to be able to tell the story of, from an efficiency, this is how we're utilizing this. These aren't just bodies sitting around, checking Facebook. They're doing this and this, and these are the impacts that we're seeing. Not having that data makes that conversation extremely difficult.
Absolutely. And it's a spot that you never want to be in as a leader, just full stop. But if you can be a lean, mean training machine, and and you've demonstrated that you can get information when required and you can pivot with the business and so on, you're just going to be well positioned to help the business navigate change, as opposed to being the part of the business that has to change. That's been, and we all say this, we've all known this for years. It's kind of that thing, that the ghost story that training professionals tell each other, which is, the training is the first thing that's cut in a recession. And,
campfire ghost story.
Yeah, exactly. And, but that doesn't have to be true. And it shouldn't be true. And we all believe that. So let's make it not true.
No. And I can speak from experience that if you're doing it well, oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes this is how you end up getting invested in tough times. But if you can't tell that story, if you don't have the data to back it, if you can't really articulate that, then it is true. Then the ghost story is true. Yeah. Because if they just say, I don't really know what this group does, you don't really seem to be helping us understand what that is, times are tight, we trim it back. But that does not, to your point, that does not have to be the narrative that always plays out.
Yeah.
So with this, because I told you, I could keep going. We could keep going for quite a while here, but I do want to transition to this next piece, because to me, this is one of the most exciting parts about what's happening with tech, is that I think, again, one of the reasons people don't get super excited about this is that people don't get super excited about some of this very administrative, rote stuff. Nobody wants to scrub 37 spreadsheets and tabulate a utilization report, or look at 47 calendars and try and pick what are the best dates to select for optimization. And honestly, that's not the best use of human capacity. Unfortunately, historically, there wasn't really a good way to get around that. And I think that is one of the leading problems that led to people avoiding this. It was like, oh gosh, nobody wants to touch this. It's 90% work that everybody hates doing. Technology is changing that dramatically, because now, guess what? Machines don't hate that stuff. In fact, they love it and they eat it up, and they're pretty darn good at it. So let's kind of shift into this whole automation piece in terms of how is AI, machine learning, right? We're back to the buzzwords. Let's throw some buzzwords into this mix.
My favorite.
It wouldn't be a good conversation on learning tech if we didn't. But let's talk about this pragmatically, because to me, this is where this whole idea of administration and ops management doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be that. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge topic, right? In terms of automation.
Whole episode just on this, probably.
Yeah, and we've got this this parable, right, that we have written out, which is like, what does Administrate in 2030 look like? And it's all the type of stuff. The Cyberpunk game just came out yesterday, which is just how committed I am to this program, by the way, that I'm not playing it right now. It's a dystopian future, but they're talking to their machines and all this stuff like we see in all these things. And that's kind of what we think about from time to time. That's a long time down. They're just simple things around automation that we think about a lot. And the first is, can you get your data model that you are working with day in and day out as a learning and training professional to be rich enough to basically give you information? And can you get at that information and interrogate it in a very fluid, dynamic, fast way that does not require folks to assist you, hopefully. And so,
a digital assistant, if you will, for learning.
Yeah. And at its most basic level, it's like building reports, right? So are you storing the data? Can you access it? Can you build a report? And what tends to happen, even when we're working on our business, why are sales down, or why is this marketing channel performing well? And you come back with the answer, and it's like, because, pay-per-click ads are doing well. Why? Right. And then you go again, and you have to be able to we talk about, torture the numbers until they confess, right? It's the Spanish Inquisition for your data. And without that ability to just interrogate your data very quickly, you lose that flexibility and the decision to support that could come from your data. And so then once you get to the point where that's second nature within your organization, how do you automate the dissemination of that information, right? Yeah. And so a lot of attention is put towards, when we're going through implementation, it's like, okay, what are the business KPIs? What are the things that you really want to focus on as a training team that means your operation is running well? And then, okay, once we got that defined, how do we transmit that information to folks, many of whom probably will never, ever log into Administrate or don't even know what it is, right? And so just the simple act of an automatic email that goes out with a report attached is transformative for organizations. And it happens all the time. And those are fairly straightforward instances of automation, or even just stuff like we've just hired somebody and they get put in the HR system, and then it automatically, spits that data into Administrate, so you don't have to think about it. When we're going through and demoing the system, there's all of these like add student, add, whatever. You do not want to be clicking those buttons. This is very lame, right? This is very 1999 or something, right? So it's kind of, getting to the point.
I'm going to stop you there, Bill, because the thing with that is sometimes we vastly underestimate how much time we end up spending doing this, which is how, to your point, you end up being the frog in the slowly boiling pot. Is you're like, I only have to do this here. It's not that big a deal. And it doesn't take me that long. It maybe takes me 10 minutes. That 10 minutes was really 30 minutes. And you're doing it 16 times a day. Suddenly you're like, oh, yes, I'm spending a day a week adding students from one system to the next.
Yes.
That inefficiency can be game changing.
Yeah, and it's insidious, right? Because there's the time that you're spending, and then there's also the quality gap that you're unknowingly introducing. So let me just explain that really. This is our moment of demotivation. Well, this is our moment of demotivation, right? Which is the number one factor that plays into a student's perception of the quality of a course, and we should all know this, is the administrative quality of the pre, during, and post course experience. And and so if you are manually adding students, or you are manually mail merging important information for students on pre-course instructions or during or post-course, or you're screwing up dietary requirements, right? But those manual emails, that's time consuming. But then what we tend to see is once you can automate that, then training programs and coordinators start sending out 3 or 4 reminder emails, and maybe it's 2 or 3 emails and a text, and so the quality of the program increases and the perceived quality of the program increases. And it's just simple bits of automation that we all like to see. Even my dentist can tell me via text message that I've got an appointment coming up, and press 1, respond with 1 to whatever to cancel, and 2 to proceed.
Yep.
Why can't we do that as training professionals? That's what we're talking about.
Well, no, I mean, think about this. We joked about this a little bit when you first came backstage, was the number of reminders you got from me. I didn't send those reminders.
Yes.
Right. I've automated that to make sure that there's a seamless user experience, that it's a seamless user experience. And oops, I forgot, or I was on vacation. Oh, John didn't know that he was supposed to be here. And oops, it was a mess. And now he experienced a mess. And now he goes, man, this guy doesn't have his stuff in order type stuff, versus the automation says, hey, we're now consistent. We're consistent. And to the end user, it feels like, wow, they've really got this stuff in order. Everything just seamlessly is happening, and it's not requiring the same resources.
Yeah. And so we have worked for years now to build out that rich data model that can receive the business rules that are often super complex for training delivery. And, it's everything from which days of the week do we want to run this, how many sessions per day, what resources are required, what instructors can teach this, all of this stuff. If we can get that baked into the computer, at least in the last couple of years, it's been kind of a choose your own adventure, leading you down this path, right? Which is the computer's telling you, great, you want to run this course? Where do you want to run it? Here's the 4 locations that you can run it in. Okay, what resource would you like to do? Pick it. And there's this epiphany, that we had a number of years ago, going back to the travel thing, actually, which is this just totally sucks on some level, right? Because it's kind of like I want to fly to China, and it goes, great. What airplane would you like? And it gives me 3 options. And which airport would you, and what landing slot, and what pilots would you like to fly, and what catering, and all this stuff. And it's like, no,
if you had to do that when you bought a ticket, nobody would go anywhere.
That's right. But that's the way this is the state of the art right now in, training. So we've been thinking about this problem a long time. And, now it's kind of like, okay, you've got your data model, you've gotten organized, you now have the business intelligence that is in front of your fingertips as a human. How can we feed that data, that business intelligence, into a computer and have them the computer and their pronouns basically tell us, here is
the best option.
The best option. And we think it's the best option for constraints that maybe you have baked in, and so on. And so that's what we're thinking about a lot right now and into next year. And it's not just the scheduling idea, but it's also content. It's also, where are their patterns? And now there's another 10 years until we get to the computer, please, do this thing for me.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got a ways to go, but I think, and we're right at time. So I'm going to wrap this up, because I think that was a fantastic kind of place to end. Because again, otherwise we're going to end up talking for another several hours on this. But I think it's an important piece to think about, the fact that it's the one piece that I would say with this, though, is this is why it's so important to get your stuff in order, because the promise of automation and artificial intelligence and all this stuff, if you are not putting good in, all it's going to do is run that train off the track way faster and way more efficiently. And that is not what you want it to do. And I think that's where, while we sometimes don't want to go there, it's like, to reach these benefits, you have to go through some of the tough work and say, we're going to get this figured out. We've been ignoring it. Let's get this figured out. Let's get this cleaned up. Let's get this digital, so that we can then start to layer on automation and start to make this happen in a way that truly allows us to spend time on the things we actually enjoy doing. Because I don't know about you, but I hate copying and pasting information into emails or trying to scour calendars. It's not fun.
No.
So with that, I want to thank you for making the time, for joining me. I'll let you get back to your game so that you can enjoy that over the weekend. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hopefully you got something out of this. Hopefully this has you thinking a little bit differently about the possibilities of operations and what that it can be an exciting thing. I get excited about it. So hopefully you do as well. So thank you, everybody, very much. Have a wonderful weekend. John, thank you for being here, and we will talk again.